I'm not sure. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to go through and see what members of the committee are here. I see, I'm just going to go in order of how I see you in the thumbnails. I see Councilman Leon Pinkett, member of the committee. I see Councilman Ryan Dorsey, sponsor of this bill. I see Councilwoman Danielle McCrae, member of the committee. Council member Christopher Burnett, member of the committee. And I got to move my thumbnail. Okay, now I see Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, also member of the committee. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to the bill sponsor to introduce the bill, talk about it, and then from there we'll take it agency by agency, and then we will offer, anybody who wants to testify can testify. So take it away, Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, for being here to hear this bill today. I want to start by just saying this is a bill that for me is kind of a long time coming. And I want to give just a little bit of background on that. And I also want to say right up front, this is like an in-depth bill. It's very long. And a lot of what's in this bill is already existing law. It repeals two almost identical sections of city code from different articles and combines them into one, doing away with a lot of redundancy and trying to clean up some language, and also affecting some new changes. Just on background for me, I represent the city council as one of the 7 members of the city's trespass towing board. I joined that board appointed by then Council President Young. I had no understanding of the business or practices associated with towing or the regulations and licensing of trespass towing or anything else related to it. And I had my very first annual tow board licensing meeting literally the day after being sworn into office. I had no clue what I was being thrust into. And it took until the next year's annual meeting for me to really feel like I was gaining a foothold of understanding about the many facets of towing, as well as learning about some of the challenges that are faced within the realm of towing. I say that all to say that there's a lot of content before us in this bill, and that I've developed a deeper knowledge of towing than I could have ever imagined I would, and that I imagine most people will ever have. I didn't put this bill forth because I'm passionate about the subject of towing licensure or towing policy or anything of this sort. I put this bill forth because I got asked to serve as one of the 7 members on this towing board, and I learned a lot. And I felt an obligation to the people of the city and to, just to utilize the knowledge that I inadvertently gained, and to try to make things a little bit better in the way that the city operates and in the way that the city provides consumer protections and oversight for things that people interact with. I did not expect for this to take up like a whole lot of bandwidth in my life, but here we are. It has taken probably 2.5 years from the time when I decided I really needed to lead a reform effort on this to this hearing today. The chair asked me to try to go into a fair amount of depth in thoroughness in kind of what's here. I'm going to try to do that as concisely as I can. As I said, the big thing that happens with this law is it takes the provisions that are in the section of code related to trespass towing, which is the business of private towing companies towing from privately owned properties and doing so under contract between the towing company and the private property owner. You know this from the signs that you've seen that say vehicles towed from this property are towed to such and such a business at such and such an address. And you see the postings on those parking lots. They're all over the place. There's an article that is devoted to trespass towing, that business. There's a whole other article that relates specifically to what's referred to as accident towing. It's also commonly referred to as medallion towing, although I don't believe the word medallion actually shows up anywhere in the city code. It's just a common parlance, has been for a long time. Those two articles, if you were to put them side by side, look almost identical to one another, but one has been revised or written more recently and is more structured and clean in its syntax. The other is a little bit looser in its forming, but the essential contents of them are almost identical. Trespass towing oversees and issues licenses for trespass towing through a 7-member board that is inclusive of a member of the city council, a representative of the police department, the Department of Transportation, the finance department, a representative of the trespass towing industry, a representative of the property management industry, and a representative of the public at large. When I joined the board, 2 of these 5 seats were vacant. We've seen additional other turnover in the time that I've been on the board. The accident towing is, the law kind of conflates in different ways things that should happen under law and things that should happen under contract. And one of the things that this bill does is kind of pulls out the stuff that really only needs to be dealt with in contract and leaves the law to things that just need to be done as essentially a licensing authority, ensuring that people who do towing business in the city are generally thought to be safe to be performing towing on city streets. So it basically combines these 2 codes and cleans up some of the language. Again, because the code that deals with accident towing is not truly limited to authorizing towing from strictly accidents, but also for other forms of towing that happens in the public right-of-way. One of the things that is introduced in this bill is, instead of accident towing, the term right-of-way towing. One of the things that happens under the trespass tow board right now is that in order for a company to be licensed to perform trespass towing in the city, they have to get a license as a company. And then every single time that company wants to hire a new driver to work for them, they have to go through another hearing just for that driver to be licensed by a board, but under criteria that is pretty explicitly laid out and doesn't really need to be reviewed by a board and could instead be performed administratively like any other license. What this bill, one of the things that this bill does is makes clear that the licensing of individual drivers may be performed administratively, essentially on behalf of the board. One of the problems that, again, I sit on the trespass towing board, so we really only deal with trespass towing, but most people don't understand the difference between different types of towing. And so they go, oh, Ryan Dorsey's on the towing board, and they bring to me everything under the sun that has anything at all to do with towing. And so I end up learning about things that have nothing to do with trespass towing, but are to do with other forms of towing, like towing from police scenes, from crashes or from stolen vehicles that have been stopped, things like that. And so one of the things that I've learned about is the prevalence of essentially unlawful towing. The code says that it is unlawful to solicit. For example, a car is involved in a crash. It is unlawful for a tower to just drive up to that crash and offer to tow the vehicle. That's an unlawful solicitation. It happens nonetheless all the time. Often when it happens, it's happening because it's being done by an unlicensed, unregulated tower who then sends the owner of that vehicle a bill for, say, $1,000 for services that if the police had called for a tow for that vehicle, the city would have charged, I believe, $240. And this is obviously unfair, and this is a practice of people being taken advantage of because they don't know any better. This happens all the time, and one of the things that this bill seeks to do by requiring that everybody who tows in Baltimore City, with limited exception, everybody has to have a license just in order to be able to tow in Baltimore City. Therefore, giving the city the ability to say that if you're towing without a license, we can fine you. And if you have a license and you're doing things that are prohibited, we can fine you for that and potentially revoke your license. And over time, consequences can escalate through different processes. So this bill, one of the things it does is takes that the trespass towing board, and turns it into an overarching towing board that's not limited just to trespass towing, that this board would now oversee, license, and regulate all aspects of towing that occur in the city. And help reduce that unlawful towing that happens in the city. One of the other things that the major outcomes of this bill that I know is also a point that is raised in the bill reports that we'll hear about from BCIT and from the police department is that this bill would change the manner of dispatch for police towing. Right now, when police call for a vehicle to be towed from a crash scene, that tow is dispatched by the city's emergency dispatch system to the company who essentially owns the territory in which the crash occurred. That territory is determined by a radius around the office of the towing company. What this bill does to change that is say that when dispatching tow trucks to crash scenes like that, it be done on the basis of the real-time nearest tow truck actual vehicle location. And it would require that there be the integration of some new technology in the dispatching system, albeit technology that is already being used for different purposes within the dispatching system. And I think that we'll hear some of that from BCIT and from the police department. One of the other things I think that this bill is really important for is setting the stage for more competitive, smaller business opportunity in doing work contracted with the city. Right now, in order to be able to do accident towing with the city, you have to be able to tow 24/7, and you have to have a certain number of vehicles to essentially signify to the city that you will be able to uphold your obligation to be able to tow 24/7. By moving to a real-time vehicle location manner of dispatching, we open the door for smaller companies who may only have one vehicle to be able to take part in some of that business. And I believe that this opens the door for us to improve our outcomes in terms of minority-owned business opportunity to contract directly with the city. Giving some of this business on a smaller scale to some companies that may not have the capacity to tow 24/7. One other provision that I think I want to touch on, two other provisions, and I think I'm going to leave it at that as my kind of overview, is that this law, like many other laws in the city, embed into the code certain financial factors like the cost to apply for a license, like the bonding amount that a company has to be able to demonstrate before they can be issued a license, and various other things that are written into the code and therefore do not get updated regularly over time to be modified to keep up with the cost of doing business or cost of inflation or whatever. This bill pulls all of those numbers out of the code and puts them onto the Board of Estimates to make an annual determination for inflationary considerations, which I believe to be a more responsible fiscal practice and something that I believe the Bureau of Revenue, the Budget Bureau, and the Finance Department are kind of moving in the direction of doing across the board in a lot of other ways. And I know we have somebody here from Finance, Budget, and perhaps they can attest to that as well. The last provision that I want to touch on is that the towing board, as it exists today, has no agency assigned to handle its administrative functions. There is no agency who is responsible for ensuring the proper operation of the board, the keeping of certain documentation. For example, there is no agency who we can, as the board, just task with doing things related to the board's oversight duties. If we have a tower who is regularly violating provisions of the law or having complaints brought against them, we have no agency who is tasked in any specific way with documenting and keeping records of that, so that when they come back before us for a license, we have detailed information about complaints that were made about that. There is some documentation, some records that are kept, but I believe that the ability to do this effectively is significantly limited by the fact that no agency is actually tasked with this. This provision is one of many that I know are spoken to in the law department's report. I know that the law department and Ashley and I have discussed all the various amendments that the law department is requesting. In this one, with this one in particular, I decided to write into this law that the law department be the administrating agency for this. But I understand that that is outside of the purview of what the law department is legally allowed to do. And so that's one thing I'm going to be asking for some change to be made to. And I can go on to a little bit more insight on that, and I probably will when it comes to Ashley or DOT or the finance department giving their reports. Again, there's a lot to this bill, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to hear about all the different aspects of it. And I'm glad to go into whatever detail needs to be gone into about the various aspects of this bill and answer questions to the best of my ability. and also point to, more knowledgeable people where that's the case. So thank you, members of the committee, for hearing this bill today. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to present the bill.
All right, thank you. So we'll now go agency by agency to let us know what your report says. So we'll start with parking. Is there somebody from parking here? Nobody from parking? All right, how about the Environmental Control Board?
We stand by our report. This will have no operational impact for us.
DOT?
Hello, thank you for having us. We do stand by our bill report, which was no objection. We didn't, initially see any major impact to DOT's own towing operations. We know that the bill would give, the opportunity for either the director to serve on the new board or appoint someone on the new board. I also I went through it again last night just to double check, and I know that one of the provisions in this would require all towing vehicles, the private towing trucks, to have a broom and cleaning supplies on their trucks. And like in the event that they show up for a crash, they would have to clean up around that area, and they would, take that on their truck and take the vehicle to one of DOT's tow yards, and then DOT would need to have a space dedicated for, that debris that they cleaned up. So that is one little additional thing. Overall, though, we have no objection, and right now we don't foresee any major physical or operational impacts to DOT.
And Liam, if you can just answer, how much does DOT charge for a tow off the street?
I can get that number to you as a follow-up. I apologize for not having that readily available.
All right. Councilman Dorsey, I'm sure you know the answer to that. Do you know?
I believe it's $240. And there are different provisions that when certain vehicles are towed, like when a peak hours vehicle is towed, when they're just trying to clear a street like Charles Street during rush hour, you can go to the tow yard and just pay your $240 and get your vehicle back. Under other circumstances, if you have unpaid tickets, you have to pay those off in order, like if you're towed for other violations or whatever, you have to pay off any outstanding tickets on the vehicle in addition to that city towing fee in order to get your vehicle back.
Gotcha. And while we're on that, just one more quick follow up. What does the city pay contractors to do that towing when the city trucks are not available?
So my understanding is that the city trucks are primarily doing like right-of-way towing in the sense of parking violations, or when we have peak hour parking restrictions. I can get you that additional information as well on what the standard go rate is for private companies picking up for automobile accidents, and some of the additional services that they provide.
Let's see if Councilman Dorsey, what does the city pay a private company to?
It's significantly less. It's in like the $90 to $110 range, something like that. I know that we have some folks from the towing industry on here, so when we get to public testimony, I'm sure that they can attest to that in a very reliable manner. I'll also note that while the city has one contract that is issued for like accident towing, that is specifically called on by police for general police dispatch, the city also has and that's done by like zone in a radius around their business office. The city also has separate contracts specifically for peak hours towing, where the city is divided into 4 quadrants, and they are primarily relied upon to do peak hours towing now, whereas in the past it was primarily relied upon city tow vehicles to do peak hours towing. The city is the primary tower of abandoned vehicles. And even still, when there are challenges in the city's capacity to perform them in a timely fashion, I think it's 4 days that the 311 system requires them to be towed in before DOT is considered late in fulfilling that service request. Sometimes the city calls on the accident towers to augment the capacity to perform that abandoned vehicle towing.
All right, thank you. Law Department, Ashley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. My Wi-Fi keeps going in and out, so hopefully you won't lose me. We stand by our report, and I was just going to quickly go through our amendments so everyone knows what we're suggesting. Just quickly on page 3 of the bill in line 2, the definition of license includes to operate a towing vehicle. And we just feel this is too broad and it should be deleted because our authority only encompasses the business of towing where a charge is imposed. Second, on page 5 in line 10, there's a definition of policy. And we're suggesting that that's either taken out because it's not necessary to have in there, or we need to change it to reflect that we are really concerned with safety, just to avoid a federal preemption issue there. But it's not, the declaration of policy is not necessary. Your intent can be determined from your legislative hearings and things like that. So that could just pose a potential problem. So we're recommending that it be taken out. And then we just point out that the city cannot, on page 5, line 28, the city can't compel the police commissioner or a designee to be on the board. I mean, certainly we have other places in the code where we request, I guess, someone to be on the board that we can't compel. But I was just pointing that out, that technically we can't require them to be on the board. That doesn't mean that you can't ask them to be on the board. But because of the legal relationship between the police and the city, we don't have the authority to require that they be on the board. Next, on page 7, line 21, I think Councilman Dorsey spoke about this. Just the law department only authorized to give advice. We're not authorized by the charter to staff. So we can certainly give advice and assist legally as much as we're able, but we're not authorized to actually staff the board. That should be a different agency. Next, on page 10, line 9 of the bill, there's several amendments about this. The board is required to develop qualifications for licensure of tow truck operators and its rules and regs. We're just asking that the actual qualifications be in the ordinance so that you're not delegating your legislative authority to the board. And I mean, that paragraph in my report is all about just, we're asking that the actual qualifications be in the ordinance rather than just delegating that to the board, because there's case law that says that you can't delegate that amount of discretion. Next, on page 12, line 22, this is another delegation issue. We're just asking that the amount be set instead of the board setting it. It could be Board of Estimates, and probably should be Board of Estimates, or just set the amount in the ordinance. And then we mentioned that on that same page, on page 12, the board is authorized to reject a proposed schedule if the charges are excessive, and we just felt that was a subjective term and we were asking for more specification on that. Last, and I mentioned this before, section 22-29 of the bill, this is just a law department, and obviously these are all law department amendments, but this is just something that we need to fix in the code anyway. There's a lot of directive language to the police. And I mean, just by way of background, a while ago, I think it was maybe over a decade ago, there was a bill that was actually initiated by the police, and they wanted the authority over medallion and right-of-way towing. So there's language in the code that really shouldn't be in there, and we've asked over the years for it to change, and it hasn't been changed. And what we're doing is we're taking out the directives to the police. So, for example, instead of saying the police must permit the owner to call, X, Y, and Z, we just say the owner may call X, Y, and Z. So we're just cleaning up the language there. But it doesn't change. I mean, it just changes the directive language to the police. And I have amendments about that. And then I just caught a couple of typos. And sorry, that's a lot, but that's our amendment. Those are our amendments.
Did you send over those amendments to us? I was just looking through my email. I don't see it.
They're part of my report, and they should be posted. But if you don't have them, I can.
They're in your package, Mr. Chair. They're attached to the Law Department report.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
You go ahead.
So some of these amendments are very specific in the report, and some of them are general guidance on how some things should be changed. Those ones that relate to kind of general guidance, or that are expressed through kind of general guidance, are some things I still need to work through, and I would continue to rely on Ashley to help advise on that. And so I would just, in general, I want to say all of these amendments are favorable to me, and I just need to work through them. I do want to just say that with the one caveat, which I believe is kind of the one that Ashley expressed herself, that I wouldn't want to take the police commissioner or police department out as being listed as a board member, but I do acknowledge the nuance of understanding that we can't compel under law that they participate. However, we know that the police department is very willing to participate and expect that they will continue to be willing to participate, and we appreciate that. And for that reason, I would just want to keep them listed as a member of the board as they are today, and as they are in many other places in the city code, and making that seat at the table for the police department. So this is all stuff that I will definitely be following up with Ashley about. And I do just want to give special acknowledgement to how incredibly helpful she has been on all of this, spending so many hours with me with this bill. And I have to express a very special place in my heart now for the case of Andy's Ice Cream LLC versus Salisbury, Maryland, which has been in a very instructive case that I've come to refer back to on dozens and dozens of different occasions, and in fact sent her an email about that she responded to just today on a completely separate matter. Thank you.
Thank you. PDC.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair. BDC stands by our response.
Okay. Finance.
Good afternoon, Mara James from BBMR representing Finance. Pedro Ponte is also on the call if we have further questions. We stand by our report. We believe that over time, the consolidation of these boards will make sense and have a lot of efficiencies. The only costs that we knew of when writing our report or thought about were the impacts of the changes to the licensing fee that might happen that could impact revenue, as well as possible charges that we might face from the cost per tow with vendors that we would engage with. Based on what was discussed by the sponsor earlier, there might be an initial cost for BSIT in terms of the new system, but we don't expect that to be any long-term impact.
All right. Thank you. Fire. Anyone from the fire department?
Hey, this is Matt Steg. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Matt Stegman from the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. This was mentioned before the hearing. I don't believe that there's anybody from Fire on, but they did submit a written report, and they stand by that report.
All right, thank you, BPD. And
Your call has been
thank you for voluntarily being here, Michelle.
We are definitely, we're here. We stand by our report, and I just want to point out a couple of different things. And for the record, Michelle Wurzberger, Director of Government Affairs for the Baltimore Police Department. The department is very supportive of this bill. We have put together a very loose committee of folks who are trying to work through the mandates in the bill to try and figure out how we operationalize it. In our report, we do make a suggestion that perhaps we could bring together a work group, a kind of a more formal work group to start accumulating and documenting all of our system requirements. We're very anxious about the technological needs that will be needed in order to make this actually work for everyone. And so, if it's not possible to pull together a work group before the bill is approved by the council, we definitely would like to have a longer a period to operationalize it. That being said, I do want to acknowledge I have a number of folks with me today. I have Captain Jessica Leach, who heads up our communications department. I have Captain Anthony Smith, who was until Sunday in charge of fleet safety and towing. I have Chief Woody Davis, who's in charge of he's our Chief Technology Officer. And we also have Eileen Hall, who also works in communications. We are socially distanced in this room, but they are here in case you all have any questions of them.
All right, thank you. BCIT, Mr. Carter.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to this bill. BSIT has reviewed the bill, and we have no objections to the bill. Similar to what our colleagues from police have just mentioned, we also like to collaborate and pull together what those system requirements would be, look at how we would leverage any type of technology solutions, and then from there determine what the implementation schedules are and the dependencies so that we can make sure that we meet the goals of the legislation. As Councilman Dorsey said earlier, there's a lot in that bill. We want to make sure that we understand what those requirements are and how to best deliver those requirements to make this bill a success. With me, I have today Brandon Blevins, our acting director for our CAD system, as well as Lisa Allen, our director for 311. And we would be part of that interagency group that would pull this together. We have set up other similar groups like this for the close equals close process, as well as processes that are geared to leverage how we do construction management for some of those systems. So this is not a new process for us. We think it'll add value, that collaboration to pull requirements together. Thank you. Or are there any questions? I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give parking another chance. Anybody from parking here?
Thank you very much. Good evening. Fran Brzezinski with the Parking Authority. We reviewed legislation and are supporting of the legislation, and I'm available for questions.
Any committee members have any questions for any of the agencies? Any council members with questions for the agencies? Nobody?
Mr. Chair, I actually have a question. I'm not sure, and this is Danielle McBray. I'm not sure if this is for BSID or if it's for the Baltimore Police Department. We were talking about integration into the dispatch system, and you're talking about the phase in, the system requirements. Do we have like a rough estimate, or have we started talking about cost?
At this point, I don't know that we have enough information to say what the level of integration would be or the level of cost would be, given just some of the language that this bill produces. We would have to meet and dig a little deeper to get what I would say a high level planning estimate to give us an estimate of cost.
Do you know an estimated time of how long that would take to just know the cost of what it would be for the implementation?
I don't think I'm hearing some feedback. Good question. We haven't formed a group yet. So my guess is best case scenario, 1 to 2 months. Worst case scenario, probably 3 to 4.
Thank you.
Any other council members with questions? Okay, so I got a couple of questions. Can someone, whether it's the bill sponsor or somebody in DOT, want to talk about what this bill does regarding predatory towing? I know when I was getting my coffee today, somebody stopped me and said, "Oh, I saw that you guys are having a towing thing, and we're real concerned that you pull up someplace, you can pull up to the apartment complex you live in, and within 30 seconds, you're unloading groceries, your car's towed, and obviously there's not a obviously the management company or somebody didn't call and a tow truck show up in 30 seconds. If the response time was that good, they can go work for BPD. But being that they don't, I wanted to see if anybody could speak to what this bill does to address that issue, if anything. Councilman Dorsey, got anything on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I appreciate this question. It's something that has, as a tow board member, come to me over and over again as kind of a core and standard complaint. What you're referring to is in the trespass towing industry referred to as patrol towing. I don't mean to vilify the practice as a whole or anything, but I know that if you Google search predatory towing, the practice of patrol towing is one of the first things that is one of the most consistent things that comes up. Now, look, it's not illegal and it does have a relevant place. When you talk to trespass towers, it becomes clear that a property management company, for example, let's say a strip mall. There's a grocery store and it has a fire lane directly in front of it. If the fire department happens to come by at a moment when some unattended to vehicle is parked in that fire lane in front of the grocery store, the owner of the strip mall, the developer, the commercial landlord, they can be fined for failing to keep clear a legally required fire lane. And so the operator, the owner, the landlord at that strip mall, that complex, isn't necessarily standing there watching at all times for such violations. And so the patrol towing, so the trespass towing company who is contracted by the property owner is required to take a photograph to document the infraction before they are able to tow the vehicle. but do not have to be specifically called upon by the property owner or an agent on their behalf. So there is a certain place for this. The similar concerns could be raised for cars without handicap license plates or hang tags in the car, parking in handicapped parking spaces, things like that, where it's reasonable, I guess, for a car to be expeditiously removed from that location. The problem I have and the problem I get complaints about is when this happens in such an aggressive fashion that you can tell that a tower was in that parking lot and watched that person park that car there and waited for them to get out of their car and didn't say anything to that person to warn them that if they park there, they will be towed, and then immediately tow the car as soon as that person walks away. I get complaints about this regularly. Now, I will also say with the caveat that on plenty of occasions when complaints come to me about what is characterized as aggressive or unfair towing, upon investigation, those complaints turn out to be unfounded. In reality, it's actually hard for me to feel like I have to articulate this. In reality, more of the complaints that are brought to me turn out to be unfounded than those that are founded, but I still recognize the validity of the concern over aggressive patrol towing. It's not something that this bill does really anything about, but the other form of predatory towing that is common is the one that I discussed in my opening remarks, where a tower who is completely unregulated or unlicensed by the city in any way solicits somebody at an accident scene, where the city would charge $240 for that vehicle to be towed. This person rolls up, says, "Hey, I can tow your vehicle." And the next thing you know, they're sending a bill for $1,000 to this vehicle owner's insurance company. I know that this happens because I have seen and had these invoices, these receipts sent to me over and over again by people who do business with the city. So somebody who does business with the city as a police accident tower is also an on-call tower for, say, Geico. And so when Geico's policyholder has their vehicle towed by one of these, unlawful solicitors, Geico then calls one of their on-call people and says, "Our policyholder's vehicle is at such and such address, and the person who towed the vehicle is saying that it's going to be $1,000. We need you to go there with $1,000 cash, pay this person for that vehicle, and then send us the bill for that and for your towing charges." So it ends up costing Geico, instead of $250 in payout, a $1,250 in payout to have this vehicle towed. In one case, it was brought to my attention that the charge was so high that the bad faith tower ended up saying, "Oh, the vehicle's not worth $1,200, or you don't have $1,200? No worry. Just sign the title over of the vehicle to us, and we'll call it even." And this is truly a predatory practice whereby people get taken advantage of on a regular basis. And the whole point in this bill of requiring that anybody who tows for money in the city, anybody who operates a towing business has to be licensed, is to rein in this specific problem that is so prevalent. And I have to say that it's disheartening that it is the same companies over and over and over again that do this and are brought to my attention. And those companies are not from outside of Baltimore City coming in to perform this predatory business. These are people whose businesses are right in the heart of Baltimore.
Yeah, and so I thank you for that. I've had a similar experiences as you know, because you and I have discussed them at great lengths, which I think also certainly outlines what Ms. Brown said from the law department, where we should have things. This bill should get a lot of clarity, so we're not leaving a lot out there, such as the maximum amount and some other items. And so certainly, as we work towards a work group on this. Those are issues that we should discuss, and especially also with the patrol towing regarding where you do tow from and where you have some leeway or maybe can't tow from without permission. And certainly there's a difference in my mind, at least, between somebody who parks in a fire lane or a handicap spot versus somebody who may be pulled up by the loading dock and may or may not be delivering something in a regular car, or somebody who lives in an apartment complex and was parked at a spot that the management company doesn't really want anybody parking there for whatever reason. Maybe it's too close to a dumpster, or there's some other type of challenge that can come up. Certainly, I think we do need to work through during a work session the differences between these things. So the health and safety stuff, like fire lanes, certainly should be defined versus this kind of patrol towing behavior should, in my mind at least, not be allowed as it pertains to non-safety issues. And they can tow from those other spots as long as the property owners or the store calls them. So if you decide you're pulling up to a loading dock at a Giant, and you might be delivering a specialized item in a regular car, whereas somebody else might think that you're not a delivery driver and you have every right to be there, your car ends up getting towed. Or if you're somebody and there's just no parking spot and you choose to pull up at the loading dock, then that property owner has the right to call and have you towed from their property. But that shouldn't be a decision that's being made by somebody who just happens to be driving by with the tow truck.
Mr. Chair,
what's that? Go ahead.
can I make one other comment about this? These are some of these nuances of how patrol towing occurs have been a recent discussion among the tow board. There was a recent case that was brought to us where a woman she felt she had been towed unfairly, and she had photographs, video, and the towing company had some photographs. And this was a case where she had been towed from the parking lot at the apartment complex where she lives. And that apartment complex issues a hang tag for that person to display from their rearview mirror in their car. And the tower at 3:30 in the morning had driven around to patrol the lot in the dark. And in order to establish that this car was not supposed to be or allowed to be parked there, the tower took a photograph from in front of the car. You could see from the photograph that the tow truck was parked on the other side of the car. You could see it in the background of the photo, indicating clearly that the driver of this tow truck had to get out of their vehicle and walk past the side of this car in order to get to the front of it, and then took a photograph with a camera that failed to properly illuminate the area immediately around the rear view mirror of the car. So you wouldn't have been able to tell in the dark of night at 3:30 in the morning, and especially with the tint at the top few inches of the windshield, that there was in fact a hang tag hanging from the rear view mirror of this car. You couldn't see it from the distance and the height and illumination from which around this photograph. We have recently just discussed whether the tow board has the right to require things like, if it's an hour during which you have to have headlights on your vehicle, or if it's an hour during which street lights are on, the tow truck driver performing the patrol towing would have to have a flashlight in order to properly illuminate the area that they're photographing as evidence that a vehicle is in violation of some rule at that property, and whether or not the tow board can also require that photos be taken from different angles, such as through the passenger side window, from which you would have clearly seen that there was a hang tag in this car. Fortunately, in this case, once the video was shown that the hang tag was in fact there, the person who owned the vehicle was refunded their money by the by the towing company, by the trespass tower. And I do want to acknowledge that they're often forgiving and understanding, these companies, but also the tow board does have the right to make these additional kind of tweaks to the rules to hold people to a higher standard. And that is something that we are trying to do. And that does relate specifically to patrol towing.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, and, now that we're discussing this is certainly something that we have the ability to frame and shape with this piece of legislation. And I could tell you stories also that I've heard in my district and things that I've seen. And certainly there's a lot of room for improvement. So thank you for bringing this bill up. And I think that we should be working through a lot of these things, not necessarily assuming that this tow board, is going to do the work for us. And frankly, most people who are towed don't have a clue that there's a tow board. I know I didn't have a clue there was a tow board until you started talking about it. And so, I'm assuming most people don't know that there is such a thing. I got a couple other questions, but let me go around and see.
Mr. Chair, I have some follow-ups to your questions from earlier.
Sure.
So, DOT has contract. There's two standard rates, one for the east side and one for the west side. The east side is a little cheaper at $95 per tow, and the west side is at $105 per tow. And I'm assuming that's due to the distance from our tow yards, Falls Way and Pulaski Highway. The other question that was asked,
or maybe because we're fancier over on the west side.
Hey, I'm an east side guy, so let's not go there. And then from our towing, acting towing chief, Tina Wilson mentioned standard towing is $130 to $140 depending on where the vehicle is towed from. The initial fee is $50 and an administration fee is $40. Additional storage fees start at $15 a day after the first 48 hours of our lots. I will say this too, that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we suspended all, accruing storage fees because it's been challenging for folks to get the vehicles out once we closed down the in-person transactions.
Yeah, and you also suspended giving people back their cars for a long time, but that's for a different time. Is there any other colleagues that have any questions? I can go one by one unless anybody wants to pipe up.
Hey, sorry, it's Chris Burnett. I'm having some internet issues, so sorry for not doing the video. Wanted to just a quick question. I don't know if it's a question for the bill sponsor or the work group, but just I can just trying to figure out the, I guess, it was mentioned earlier by the bill sponsor that there's a number of unlicensed companies and towers. I guess what does the strategy look like to get them in the fold and make sure that they are registered ahead of time? Are there databases that are maintained or other ways that we can identify who these companies may be, just to make sure that the first time that they're, if this were to pass, that the first time they're not hearing about this new licensing program is when they're being penalized for it?
Mr. Chair, would you like me to speak to this?
Yes, sir.
I have, and I guess I have some general sense about what could be done or who could take charge of this. While towing is on the while DOT is kind of on the front line of dealing with people whose cars are towed and dealing with companies who tow cars to the city yards, or dealing with people complaining about trespass towing, things like that. It's not actually DOT as an agency that issues licenses. It's the finance department. And so I've recently been dealing, so last year I passed a law, the city council passed a law that I sponsored that relates to commercial parking facilities licensure. And through that process of making some regulations, making some modifications to the law around commercial parking facilities licensure and operation, I've learned about kind of some shortcomings in some record keeping and oversight and enforcement. And so I think that there's a good opportunity, but I'm encouraged by what has happened more recently, where the finance department has been able to mobilize to go out. So, for example, there are parking lots operating in the city as what would be defined as a commercial parking facility, but they're operating without a license. The finance department is now going out there and identifying those places that are operating without a license, and they're demonstrating, I think, in that they have the capacity to reach people, and they have the capacity to do this in a reasonable manner that is not strictly to penalize immediate law off the bat, but give people the opportunity to come into compliance in a kind of a compassionate, forgiving kind of manner. And so I think that that's something that the finance department could do fairly adequately, especially if we, as is requested by BPD and BSIT, that we extend the implementation period on this bill in order to give plenty of time to get agencies into a place where they can really uphold compliance with this, the new provisions of this law. And I'm certain that some of the towers who already do business in the city can readily identify some of the other folks that need to come into the fold. And the last point I want to make is that at this point, because I think DOT is too much kind of on the front lines of dealing with towing to not be perceived as having some sort of conflict of interest if they are also the administering agency for the tow board. I think it's probably more appropriate to have finance as the agency running the tow board, performing the administrative functions for it, and that would go right hand in hand with them being able to reach out to these companies who need to be regulated. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does.
To some degree.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other council members? Any other agencies have any questions for any other agencies or for the bill sponsor?
Mr. Chair, when you, if there's no other questions for any of the other members of our team, can you let me know, and it would be an appropriate time to let them leave to address their other duties?
Well, it doesn't seem like there's any more questions, so they can go ahead.
Okay.
You're gonna stick with us though?
I will stay. I'm here, but the rest of the other four folks are going to leave.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if we heard from BDC. Did they?
Yes,
Just
we
wrote that in
did.
the
We did.
report.
Okay.
I'm happy to speak more if they'd like. Kristen?
No, I just didn't recall. I do know we have Tom Showalter, who is the trespass towing industry representative on the trespass towing board. He is on here with us. And I know that he would like to have the opportunity to speak. And I think that because he does serve in this capacity, if the chair would oblige, I think it might be appropriate to hear
Yeah.
from him before going to other public testimony.
Yes, that's fine. Is he on the attendee list, or I don't see his name anywhere. Is he a panelist or an attendee? Because
He may be listed as an attendee. Let me.
There were some parties listed strictly as call-in users. He may be one of those.
Well, I think so. I don't see him. Yeah, he may be a call-in user. I also see Charles Parrish, and I know that he might be able to speak to this same concern.
All right, I'll unmute Charles, and then let him say what he'd like to say. If the other call-in I'll start with the other call-in after him.
Yeah, there's only one left, Mr. Chair. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey.
All right, Charles, you're unmuted. If you'd like to say anything.
I think you just muted him again.
Oh, he's unmuting himself. All right, Charles, you're unmuted. If he keeps doing it. Charles, would you like to speak? I don't know what's going on with him.
Mr. Chair, perhaps you need to explain to him that you'll unmute him and hear two beeps.
I'm going to make him a panelist. I'm going to let him on, and then let him speak. Let's see. All right, Charles, you with us? Hey, Charles, would you like to speak? I made him a panelist so he can unmute himself and speak.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you gotta stop hitting the button now.
All right. It keeps going.
I don't know what's going on with him.
I think it's equipment problems on his end, Mr. Chair.
All right, so Councilman Dorsey, at the next trespass towing board meeting, I think you should start off with some WebEx tutorials, unless there's some technical issues here. Let me go into into some of the other public testimony. Let's see if we're having issues with those people as well. And then if Charles, if you want to log out and log back in, I'll set you as an admin again. Okay. So I'm going to start off with Ashell Henry, and I'm going to unmute you. If you have something to say, please say it. If not, we'll move on to the next person. All right, Ashell, you've been unmuted. Do you have any public testimony? Nope. All right. Joe Blasio, would you like to give any public testimony? It seems like he was on the phone, so I just spared him the embarrassment and remuted him. I'll come back to him. From BMR here. I don't know if they want to say anything. You've been unmuted. Christopher, would you like to say anything?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Joe is with Charm TV.
Oh, is that who it is?
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Okay, now down to the next call-in person.
Call in user number 3.
Yeah, any testimony you'd like to give, whoever's calling in?
Hello?
Yes.
I'm Tom Showalter. I am the can somebody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Tom. Take it away.
I'm sorry.
To say.
I'm sorry. My name is Tom Showalter. I am the board representative for the impound towers. And I just want to say I think it's a great idea that we're bringing the two tow boards together. I just have some concerns and some problems that I'm hoping Mr. Councilman Dorsey will at least hear my concerns of the again, it has nothing to do with the impound side. It really has to do with the police medallion side of using other people as far as towers that don't necessarily want to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think when we look at what the city needs, the city's going to need some people. Again, I was at one time a police medallion tower, and it's something that you need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you have somebody that, again, I'm assuming we're going to use this like an Uber, to where you get to turn on an app. Hey, I want to do a tow. Hey, I want to turn off an app. I just don't see how that's going to benefit the city, especially, I think it's a little unfair to the people that do, because the city's going to need people to work on holidays. They're going to need people to work on the weekends, people at nights, and you're going to have people that only want to work Monday through Friday and they want to turn their phones off. And for the people that do want to work, I just think it's going to hurt the city service-wise. I understand us trying to open the doors up and let everyone in, but I also think it's unfair for the people that genuinely want to do this for the right reasons, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and for the people that just want to work when it's raining and they know there's a lot of accidents out there. So quick, let me turn on my phone and I can sit on Hilton Parkway, and once I'm on Hilton Parkway, I can get, 8, 10 tows. Hey, guess what? I'm going to call it quits for the day, and I'm going home. And then, the city's going to have to rely on somebody that does want to work. Maybe they're on the east side, and they got to run because they're on all the way over to the west side because there's nobody over here. And I just happened to be somewhere, we were in Ocean City over the weekend. And again, we're trying to Uber around. Well, it was later in the evening. Well, that literally said nobody was available. We had nobody to come get us. So here we are now. We're relying on public transportation to try to get back to our hotel. And I just think that before we make that decision, we should really, really have an open conversation about how is that going to hurt or help the city down the road. And I understand open the doors up. I'm not fighting about that. I'm just think service. I think that's just a little unfair. I think we should stick to, if you want to do this, you do have to be ready for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the holidays. It's unfair that certain people just don't want to work on that holiday. So with that being said, the impounding side, I heard you all mention earlier that, predatory towing. Sure, there are companies out here that may do that. I'm doing my best to try to, and narrow that down. But reality is that the private parking lot people that own these properties don't want certain things to happen. And in the middle of the night, you're not going to be able to call that in. So Mrs. Jones comes home on her night shift and somebody's parked in her spot, or they're parked over 3 lines and they can't get in. Well, guess what? We can't go. That lady can't get a hold of management. They're not going to be able to tell us. So where does she go park? Now, she has to park illegally. And yep, she might get towed illegally because the original guy, maybe he didn't have a permit. Maybe he's not even belong in that property. He needs to be towed, and it needs to be in the contract. He didn't belong in spot 3. Well, that's where he was as long as the pictures verify that. I don't see that that's a bad tow. Or he belongs 2 apartment complexes over, but they were having a party. Now, he decided to park over here. Guess what? This property people here pay to live here. They want their spots, and I think he should be towed. And in the middle of the night, maybe there's nobody to call that in. But the people that are coming there to pay there, that have already paid to be there, should have the right to have that vehicle removed, not having to call in. As long as the pictures was taken, there is a contract with every property manager or every property company. We tow for this reasons: blocking the dumpsters, parked in a fire lane. Councilman Dorsey made a perfect example. The fire department comes by, there's a fire. Well, there's 3 cars parked out there. Nobody called them in the middle of the night. The fire's done going. The fire department can't get to the fire plug because they're blocking it. That should have been automatically a patrolable issue. Sure, you're going to have everybody say, I was only here for a minute. I'm telling you, 99% of the cases I've ever seen, they was there way longer than a minute. Way longer than a minute. Does a driver patrol through the properties? That's what the property people want. They don't want people blocking the curbs or parked in a handicap zone or blocking their dumpsters because then they can't get their dumpster emptied or somebody comes home can't park. So I understand we're rewriting, again, the rules and regulations are so old and antiquated, but we don't enforce the rules and regulations that we have, including in the police medallions. They do need to be updated. I agree 100%. But before we're trying to reinvent the wheel, I think we give certain things we don't need to reinvent. I just don't agree with that. I don't, and I just would like to be part of any workstation or any work conversation. My schedule is open. Anytime Councilman Ryan wants to speak, I would love to be able to speak to that because I have so many questions looking through the bill itself, and I know we're not, this isn't the time, but I would love, before anything is etched in stone, to let me bring my concerns to everybody. And these are just a couple of them. And that's, my whole speech.
Yeah, so thank you for your testimony. First off, all the work sessions and hearings are open to the public. And so you and anyone else is, of course, welcome to join. And that will be advertised when those are on the website, as well as Councilman Dorsey heard you. And I'm going to ask him to make sure he informs the whole board to also get the word out whenever that work session would take place. I may have missed in the beginning. Are you in the industry as well?
Yes.
I missed. What was that?
I own the Auto Barn Towing.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I'll give you an idea. Knowing about this phone thing, I just got notified yesterday. So it was last minute. It was trying to notify everybody because I don't believe everybody was notified of this. I know Tina was, and Tina sent it out to me, and then it was a last minute. Hurry up! Let's try to get as many people as I can involved. That's why I don't believe there's a lot of people in here tonight.
Gotcha.
On the towing side of it.
Gotcha. I understand. There's different amendments that will be on this bill. Law Department, I'm not sure if you were here in the beginning, they outlined some. So those will be discussed there. There's a bunch of different amendments and other things that need to still help shape this conversation. And I certainly appreciate your testimony and the information you're bringing to the table. I was kind of hoping you were going to say you're with a different company, because there's one company that I get complaints about all the time, but I'll save that. I'll save that for a different session. But it's not yours, so congratulations on that.
I do my best, and I thank you, Blake. I'll give you another, and this is just Councilman Ryan. In here, there is GPS tracking that's going to have to be purchased to find out what truck is. And again, this I think can be worked out. Councilman Ryan's theory is to track the closest truck. Who's paying for that tracking system? And in today's economy, who's going to be paying for that? That's a very expensive piece of equipment. Then I have a question. If in fact the city is going to deal with the closest tow truck, how is my dispatcher going to know if you've contacted that driver? He's here. We're going to give him the tow. Well, maybe he's on another tow. Maybe he already has a tow on the back. I don't see that to be a logical way of doing it, because then my dispatch, now we have 24-hour dispatch, 2 dispatchers every shift, 24 hours a day. So if you spot my truck on GPS tracking and you're telling me I have to pay for it, or is the city going to pay for it, and you're going to give it to that closest tower. So he's at the corner of the 2500 block of Washington Boulevard. You know that because you're tracking my truck, but my dispatcher has to know what he's doing, or you're going to have to call it. I think that's the lag in time that nobody's looking at. So you're going to call the Auto Barn. We see your truck.
Yeah, we'll work through those kind of details during the work session.
Okay.
I certainly hear where you're coming from. I myself also, have some questions, and have spoken to the bill sponsor at length about that. I've been on multiple ride-alongs late at night, and seen of accidents, and seen as it was that how long it's taken tow trucks to come. And then I found out later on that there's actually guarantees, and I can just assure you I've seen firsthand some of those guarantees not being met. So certainly I am concerned as well that if somebody, is in, God forbid, an accident on a holiday, or in the middle of the night, well, that's not the most ideal time for someone to be working. So I do want to, and the bill sponsor has, has taken that feedback, and we'll continue to work through just making sure that, controls are in place so that we don't have those gaps in service and that we can work through some of the other challenges.
Like there's rules on the medallion towers right now because there are towers out there. Councilman Bryant is so correct that they're hawking accidents. They have scanners in their trucks. Well, reality is that if they're not a medallion tower, they shouldn't even be allowed on the scene. The officers should say no, back up, because Baltimore County has that. If you're not a Baltimore County Police approved tower, you can't even come on the scene. That would stop the overcharging. But the police department don't enforce that, and that is in the rules and regulations right now. That's in there. But the police department don't enforce that. They just don't. If you're not a medallion tower, you should not even be allowed on the scene. Years ago, when I was a police tower, it was that way. They kept them at bay. Now, unfortunately, over the years, new officers coming in, I guess they don't read all the rules and regulations, but they've allowed them to come on the scene. But you would stop that predatory towing for police if, in fact, you just don't allow them on the scene, and you already have that in the rules and regulations. That's in there, and they don't enforce it now. I don't see how giving the people that are robbing the citizens, giving them a license, I think that's giving them a license to rob, because now they're going to say, I got the license. Unless the city audits them every week, look, we can tear receipts up. He can go out and still do that tow, write $1,000, still make him pay it, tear the receipt up. You auditing him is not going to show the receipt. So there's a company out here right now that I know does it. They don't have numbers on the receipt. So when you get that receipt, it's not going to have a number.
Right,
They're going to say, did you tow this car on 3/5? Nope. Well, there's going to be no record because there's no number.
Tom, we'll go through that during the work session. We have one more person who's here to testify.
User number 5, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'm unmuting them now. Go ahead. Would you like to testify?
Is this me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's Charles Parrish. I was on the video, and every time it would unmute, it would go to mute again. So I didn't know what I was doing. It's the first time I've ever done one of these type things.
Welcome
and hopefully
back.
we don't go through this pandemic again. Yeah, my name's Charles Parrish. Lifelong Baltimore City resident. Was a firefighter, and the last 30 years I've been in towing, from police, repossession, road service. Last 20 years I've specialized in trespassing and helped with the state legislation. I'm the legislative chair for the Towing Recovery Professionals of Maryland. I've had the privilege, and it has been working with Mr. Dorsey. He's been very open, and I like what he's trying to get to. I don't want to rehash what Tom has said, but the major components that, as an association for the state representing police and trespass towing, qualifications. One truck is not enough to do what you're asking in recovery. When a car breaks down, that's called road service towing. That's the easiest qualifications with equipment and as a driver. But when you start getting into accidents and it becomes recovery, that's specialized training, whether it's through years of working with guys like me or Tom who have been doing it for a long time, or the equipment that you have to do it safely. So many accident scenes have become disasters because of these unlicensed towers, to which Baltimore City has had this issues for a very long time. I've been doing this since the 90s, and there's been scab towers out there since the 90s who have been overcharging, overbilling, everything that Mr. Dorsey said. And as Tom said, it's been against the law. It's piracy, and it's against the law, but it's just not enforced. The only one that can enforce it is the police on the scene. So I'm not blaming the police, not at all. But if we're going to stop it, that's where it needs to start. And then those towers need to be penalized. The fact is, and Mr. Dorsey, and I think Mr. Itzy said it already, there are certain towers. I am active towing, Vision Wrecker Service. There is active towers out there doing it now, but they're the same towers who are donating to council members, who are getting their license renewed every year. That's the issue. Last year, at last year's meeting, there was 3 companies that had more than 3 unfounded claims. In other words, they were wrongful tows. Yet they were still awarded a license. Qualifications for equipment and personnel, enforcement of the rules that are in place. Over the last 30 years, I've seen us get stricter and stricter. The only ones that are following the rules are the ones that are following the rules that we had in place before. Every time you make a new rule, the people that weren't following the old rule ain't following the new one either. And those are the towers of these nightmares of these $1,000 bills, $1,000 bill payments, $100 and some storage per day.
Right, I got
$500.
Yeah, and that's why we need to work.
That's those people. Yeah, and
that's why we need to work towards having maximums and other controls in place. Is there anything else on this bill that you would like to speak to? I think some council members have.
Well, I agree with the licensing across I think any tower working in the city of Baltimore should be licensed. My questions, though, and I had 2. My questions, one was, this bill, if it passes, will it also establish what the RFP would state? Will there be an RFP, first off? And also, when you're talking about competitive towing, remember, quality is better than quantity. And towing, I don't want a guy out there that can do it for $65 and has crappy equipment and untrained people. That guy, this is a specialty. It costs schools. Just for me to put a guy in a truck legally, I'm spending over $1,000. That's for the personnel. Just to put him in that truck, he's got to be certified. This is what I do. It's not required, and it should be. I never understood why we had to do background checks on drivers that responded to police scenes, but yet if they worked for a motor club, they could show up in a neighborhood to a mom and daughter or anybody, and they could be a pedophile or a rapist because nobody regulated them. So I agree with the licensing. I do have that. I just hope that the qualification on equipment and personnel, and then there be enforcement of rules already in place. Thank you, and keep up the great work, guys.
All right, thank you. Councilwoman Sneed.
Yes, can someone because it's been brought up a number of times that the police department could help out with this. So what exactly happens on a scene? Like, can someone from the police department explain what's going on and why we're not checking and what we should be checking for?
Sorry about that. I had to find the unmute button. This is Michelle. I don't know. I will do some digging, and when the work group meets, I will make sure that we address that at that point, or before that either.
Mr. Chair, I could speak to this for a second.
Go ahead, and I could also speak to it if you wanted, because I've been on multiple scenes when it's happened. But go ahead, Councilman Dorsey.
Yeah, look, one of the things that happens is there are a few different things that happens. One is the police officer just shrugs his shoulders and says, hey, look, there's somebody here to tow the car. I'll just let them. And just like disregards the law that says that solicitation is prohibited. That's one thing that it does happen. And that falls squarely on the shoulders of police officers. It's either a training problem or it's a problem of a lack of concern for actually upholding the law. I'm sure it's some combination of the both with the frequency with which it happens. Another thing that happens is tower drives up and a police officer says, hey, I didn't call you. You're not a police tower. The tower says, well, that's my cousin. She called me. That's perfectly legal if it's actually what happened. There's the law doesn't prohibit a person from calling their own tower. And so if the tower comes up and says, oh, they called me, and then the police officer doesn't go and check with that person and say, did you actually call this tower to this scene? And just assumes this tower is telling me the truth, then that's one thing that happens. And then frankly, I've had situations where the circumstance was such that you couldn't pay me any amount of money to believe it was anything other than a police officer being on the take. That a tow truck showed up to a scene immediately after the officer did, and where there was never any call for service to dispatch to have a tow truck come out. But before that tow truck got there, the police officer said, "We'll have a tow truck here for you in just a second," where it couldn't more clearly indicate that that officer is on the take with that scab towing company that came to that scene. So there's a whole range of issues here that unfortunately have to do with police officers not upholding the law in the way that they should. And of course, because the police department is a state agency and we have such limited ability to intervene in any way with anything with respect to the police department, we are really shorthanded in our ability to do anything.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Councilwoman Sneak?
No, that's it. I just needed some clarity on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing. I mean, I was on a scene not too long ago of a car accident, and we waited. I think it was well over an hour from when the officer called for a tow through dispatch to when they were coming out. We checked on it multiple times, and it. I think it maybe have been closer to an hour and a half. I remember bringing it up to Councilman Dorsey. So there's that. Any other council members have any questions? No. Okay. So we will be having a work session on this. We'll be scheduling it. I'll be scheduling it with the bill sponsor. In the meantime, based on this conversation, I do have an amendment that I would like to introduce, which I'm happy to discuss further at the work session. But I would like to at least have this amendment put into the bill, and then we can of course have further discussion at the works thing. So I sent it over to all of the council members, and basically all it does is address what Ms. Brown brought up as far as the law department and having a maximum fee set in place based on the fact that tows do occur. The city can pay contractors in the $90, $95 range and up. I think it's fair to say that that shouldn't really be more than an industry standard on just as far as what margins look like. It's widely acceptable to double your money, and so I don't really think that we should be further taxing the citizens of Baltimore and those who already are struggling with many other issues. I know I had a recent case in my district of one who's an 85-year-old lady got towed because her handicap sticker was not as visible. Her car got towed. She couldn't get it out because she didn't have the money that was demanding. Obviously, it accumulated because of the storage fees, and that's a whole separate thing. But then it put it out of reach, and for weeks she couldn't get her car back. And we just hear stories like this all the time. And so basically what my amendment is that just across the board on page 12 at the beginning of line 22 to insert and to also do after line 23 that in no event may the fee for towing, this isn't for storage or any other things, but for physically towing the car from one location to another in the city exceed $180. So that is my amendment, and hopefully that addresses the maximum piece. And I'm sure we have a lot of other pieces to work through during the work session. But as an amendment, I have on the floor if anybody's interested in seconding it.
Mr. Chairman, procedural question. Do you want to pass the amendment tonight and have it added to the bill, or you want to just send it to legislative reference to be considered at the work session?
Oh no, I already have it drafted. It's in it's in the proper format. I just sent it around to all the council members.
Could you?
Let me forward it to you also, Richard.
Okay, because if you pass it tonight, then it should be sent up to legislative reference so they can rewrite the bill.
This was just drafted by legislative reference.
Okay, but if the amendment is going to be adopted tonight, then it has to be added to the bill for the work session. They have to rewrite the bill.
Right, so that's the intention for them to do that.
Okay.
Okay, but I just forwarded it to you, Richard.
Okay.
I'll second it. Snead will second.
All right, so there's a second on that. Richard, if we can do a roll call vote on this.
Okay, you're the mover, and Councilwoman Snead is the seconder.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Ready? Chairman Schleifer.
Yes.
Chairman Schleifer votes aye. Vice Chair Burnett.
Aye.
Vice Chair Burnett votes aye. Mr. Cohen. He's not signed in. I certainly believe he's absent. Member McCray.
Yeah.
Member McCray votes aye. Mr. Pinkett.
Yes.
Mr. Pinkett votes aye. Member Snead.
Yes.
Member Snead votes aye. Okay. Yeah, five votes in the affirmative, and the amendment is agreed to. Do you know who drafted it at legislative reference, so I can send it to him?
I don't divulge my sources. I'll have to talk to you about that offline.
Oh, it's probably on the draft, but I have to know who to send the.
Yeah, I'll get you all that information. But in the meantime, thank you all for attending. We look forward to having a work session to discuss all the different questions that were raised tonight and anything else. And we encourage as much participation as possible. And when that gets scheduled, it will be on the City Council website. And also Councilman Dorsey, if you can send it out to the towing board, that would be great as well. We are now in recess. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.